Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to do the first part of my reading wrap-up for September. I know it's not the end of the month, but I've already read 8 books, and some of them have to go back to the library, and I'm really excited about the reading that I've done this month, and I want to talk about it now before I forget some of the details. So I thought I would just do sort of a mid-month wrap-up, and then do whatever books that I read in the rest of the month of September later on. Excuse me. So the first book that I completed, and I'm sorry I don't have a copy of it to show, but it was my sister's copy that she lent me, and so I've given it back to her. But it was the classic by John Steinbeck, East of Eden. East of Eden, as I'm sure you know, is probably considered Steinbeck's most ambitious work. It follows 2 families, the Trask family and the Hamilton family in the Salinas Valley in California through generations as they continually reenact sort of the whole Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel mythology. I very much enjoyed East of Eden. I thought it was a great novel for a classic that was like 600 pages long. It read very quickly. It was very engaging. I believe I've read 3 or 4 other Steinbeck novels, and this one is definitely my favorite of his so far. I loved the characters. They had some very interesting characters. I loved especially the story about the Hamilton family seems to follow John Steinbeck's family, and some of this may or may not be sort of his own family story. I'm not sure. But there's one story about his mother, Olive, who goes up in a biplane sort of as support for the war, to support the soldiers and all that stuff. And she's totally terrified and she doesn't want to do it. And that story that was really funny. And there's all these sort of vignettes popped into the main narrative about the Trasks and the Hamiltons that sort of do these character studies of these, supporting characters who aren't the main characters in the story. And I really loved that aspect of the novel. In addition, there was one sort of main baddie character, Kathy or Kate, and she was a real piece of work. I was not expecting to sort of have that psychopath type character be in a Steinbeck novel. It was quite surprising to me that he wrote that style of a character. So definitely recommend East of Eden if you haven't checked out that classic. The next book I finished was a nonfiction memoir by Roxane Gay. I apologize for the glare there. This is a memoir of my body, her memoir of her undisciplined fat body, as she describes it herself, and why and how she has gotten to the size that she is, which has to do with a very traumatic episode that happened when she was 12 years old, and how being fat is viewed in our culture, an exploration of why is being fat like the last thing that people think it's okay to make fun of you for or to look down at you for. Why is our society sort of built around making fat people a second-class citizen? I found a lot to relate to in this memoir. I think Roxane Gay's writing is amazing. She's so incisive, she's honest, she's witty. I'm a sarcastic person myself, and Roxane Gay is also a sarcastic person, and she's not afraid to turn that on herself as well as the wider culture. So this was one of the books that I predicted would be a 5-star read for me, and it definitely was. I absolutely recommend that you check out Hunger by Roxane Gay. The next book I completed was one that I borrowed as an ebook from my library. It was called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder. I'm looking down at my notes because I don't have it to hand. Kathleen, I will link her channel down below, had recommended this book as something we should read if we're concerned about current political issues facing not only America but the rest of the world. And it is a short essay collection, 83 pages, I think, was the ebook version that I read, all about sort of fascism and Nazism and how those political movements have shaped and continue to impact our political systems today. I found it to be very frightening in terms of where we are today politically in the United States. I see a lot of parallels, and that's sort of what Snyder's pointing out, is the parallels between what happened in the early part of the 20th century and what's happening now. So if you're at all concerned or interested in sort of how we got to where we are with our political system, I would definitely recommend that one. The next book I completed was Glass Houses by Louise Penny, which is the 13th book in the Inspector Gamache mystery series. I listened to this on audio. I really love this series on audio. The narrator does an excellent job with it. And I would consider the Inspector Gamache series a more literary mystery series. It's much more about the characters involved than it is about gory details about the murder or anything like that. I mean, you definitely get into the details of whatever the crime is in each mystery, and you get into a little bit of the police procedural aspects of it. Especially in this book, it's got a piece of courtroom drama about it, where Inspector Gamache is on the stand testifying in a murder case. And that certainly is part of the story, but it's really about the character development. And in this installment, Penny is exploring themes of your conscience and what impact people's conscience plays on their action, about being an outsider in a community, about how the illegal drug industry has impacted not only our communities, but our policing of communities. I really, really loved this book. Definitely you don't want to start with the 13th book, but if this is the type of mystery series that you like, I would encourage you to go back and start from the beginning. The next book I completed was another nonfiction. This one's Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly. This is an account of the black female mathematicians that helped put Americans into space. And the story begins in World War II when NASA's predecessor, the NACA, needed female mathematicians to come to work for them to perform the calculations for all of our air research. So any of the plane development that was happening during that time period, they needed female mathematicians to come in and fill the roles that they could not fill because the men were all gone. And what was very interesting to me was that these women were hired and the job description was computer. They actually did all the calculations by hand to figure out how to design and build planes to meet all the needs of the military, and then after World War II to meet commercial flight needs, and then as we got into the space race with the Soviets, to meet those needs. And it was just absolutely fascinating. Not only that, but this delves into the situation of racism in the workplace, especially for females. So sexism in the workplace was addressed, because certainly white women were, had to deal with the sexism issues, but black women had to deal with racism issues on top of that. And it's just mind-blowingly unbelievable that such skilled people were treated the way these women were treated in the workplace. And the gains and the concessions that they earned for their coworkers by being willing to stand up for their rights, while also just being so capable and intelligent at their jobs. It's just an amazing story, and I look forward to watching the movie that was made based upon this book as well. The next book I completed was another nonfiction. It's a very nonfiction heavy month so far. This is Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right by Arlie Russell Hochschild, I believe is how you say it. This book blew me away. It was so excellently done. This author is a sociologist. She's from Berkeley, California, and she decides to go to a red state to study why conservatives think the way that they think about government and how we got to where we are with Trump being president. So she goes to Lake Charles, Louisiana area, and she starts to interact with Tea Party Republicans, evangelical Republicans, and to understand, their stories and how they looked at the world, and to really interact with them on a personal level to try to understand where they were coming from. and she uses the lens of environmental issues to try to understand their point of view. So why would people who live in an area, because this is like the chemical alleyway in Louisiana, this area of Lake Charles, this huge petroleum and chemical industry, lots of plants, lots of factories that deal with making products from petroleum and other really nasty chemicals. And a lot of the people she talks to work in those industries. And why are those people who have lived in such a heavily polluted, have been impacted by toxicity, the rates of cancer are highest, I think, in the nation in this area. Why people who have been so impacted by that are willing to give these companies a pass and actually blame the federal government, the state government, and regulations for their problems. They don't blame the industry for it. And why is that? How do they think that way still? And also, how can they support, a candidate like Trump who thinks climate change isn't real, all of these things that they are impacted on a day-to-day basis to these environmental changes. And what she finds out is fascinating, that these people have such an intense loyalty to the companies that they feel have provided them with a way to make a living, and that their honor and their respect for themselves as a person is tied up with their ability to make a living and support their families. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was she found that, liberals feel like the inequality and the unfairness in our country is based on the fact that 1% of the population controls most of the wealth and all the rest of us are left to manage on everything else. And that these folks, these conservatives, feel that the unfairness and the inequality in this country is directly due to the fact that the government is taking what working class people give and giving it to minorities and other people who are cutting the line in front of them. That, these people have been standing in line and doing the things that they've been told to do in order to achieve the American dream, and the government takes their hard-earned tax dollars and other things, their jobs, whatever, and gives them to other people who are in the back of the line and lets them advance before them. And that's where their anger comes from. And they're tired of being told how to think and what to feel about these minority groups. I had a real hard time wrapping my brain around that. I had a real hard time feeling like I can't understand the lack of empathy that perspective brings to the table. But it did open my eyes to, their thoughts and feelings about this. I don't agree with them, and I think that they are hurting themselves in a lot of cases, but I get the point. I don't think it's right, but I get the point. And I think that this book would be good reading for anybody on either side of the political spectrum. So I would recommend this one. The last two books I want to talk about kind of intersected in my mind because I finished them on the same day. One was my audiobook, and it was In the Country We Love by Diane Guerrero, who is a woman who you may not have heard of. I didn't know her because I don't watch either of the TV shows that she's on. She's an actress who is on Orange is the New Black, and Jane the Virgin, I think, is the other one. And she was born in this country to undocumented illegal immigrants from Colombia. And her memoir is all about how she grew up with the fear of being deported hanging over her parents. Her parents were actually really deported. When she was 14, she came home from school to find them gone, and nobody ever checked up on her. She was left at 14 by herself with no parents, who had to depend on the kindness of friends to have a place to stay so that she could finish high school and go on to college from there. And it's all about her journey and how she supported herself and how she achieved where she is today with her acting career. It was not a smooth transition for her. She dealt with a lot of issues. I would say if you have trouble with self-harm or suicide issues, this book maybe you would not enjoy. I found it an uneven reading experience. I liked parts of it, but I disliked parts of it as well. And I will get into that once I talk about the other book that I completed to this point in the month, and that is another nonfiction sort of memoir, My Life with Bob, A Flawed Heroine Keeps Book of Books, Plot Ensues, by Pamela Paul, who is the editor of the New York Times Book Review. And I mean, really, these books couldn't be more different, right? This is about reading, and Pamela Paul is a white, upper middle class person who's very successful in her field and had a lot of, I guess, what you would call privilege in her life compared to Diane Guerrero, who, lived in real poverty when she was a child and through her young adult life, and has now become, famous, but it wasn't an easy path by any means. The things that I disliked about each of these books were the same. Basically, the sections of each of these books that dealt with the author's preteen and teenage years, like through college and early adulthood, I struggled with. I mean, come on. And I know I have two teenagers that are in this age range, so I absolutely know that it's true that they are whiny, self-involved creatures at that age. And these two books really, in those sections, bogged down for me. I got really just like, come on, get over yourself. Obviously, it all works out in the end, right? Because we know that both of these people are successful now. I mean, I get what each of them are trying to say about the struggles that teenagers and young adults have to sort of figure out their own shit and figure out who they are and to get to the adult that they're gonna be. I just don't enjoy reading about it. I have a hard time with what I call navel gazing and like sort of the sorting out of feelings and all that thing. I thought in the Diane Guerrero book, In the Country We Love, her attitude towards her parents after they get deported, like she refuses to talk to them on the phone for a long time. Like she blames them for being deported. Like they were trying to make, a better life for her and her brother. And she like blames them. And she, of course, as the book goes on, she gets over that and she deals with her emotional state, her sense of abandonment, that they were gone when she was, still young and she had to fend for herself. And I get all of that. I mean, it's totally fair that she felt that way. I just didn't enjoy reading about it. I found it, irritating to the extreme to deal with. And same with the Pamela Paul book. Like she, as a young adult, has like a bad relationship and she goes on these travels. She thinks she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She goes to Thailand and she just like wanders around and like tries to figure out what to do with herself. And I was just like, I hope the rest of the book isn't like this because I'm done. But once she like gets her shit together and like figures out the path that she wants to follow and gets settled into her adult life, I loved it. I loved the rest of this book. And it was so interesting to me. I obviously, I very much related to the, raising children and starting a family, and starting a marriage and all that stuff and how that impacts your reading life. Yeah, I totally am on board with that. And then I'm going to put that down because that's bugging me. But the Diane Guerrero, same way. Once she like figured out the path she needed to take and she started working towards that, like with focus, and she worked on her emotional issues and like tried to get a handle on those like in an adult way, I was like right there. It was very interesting reading about how she broke into acting and the hard work that she put into her career. I really enjoyed. So I guess my problem is with that whole emotional teenager, young adult section of books. I have a hard time with it. I don't enjoy reading about it. I understand that it's a realistic portrayal of how people deal with that part of their life. I don't want to revisit my own life at that age, and I don't particularly like revisiting other people's lives at that age. So there you go. That's my opinion. It's probably not popular, but here you are. So that's it for me for this wrap up, and this is going to be extremely long, and I apologize for that, but I had a lot to say about these books. I read some very good books. I really have been digging into the nonfiction and loving it, And I don't imagine that my end of September wrap-up is going to be much different. So stay tuned for that. Talk to you later.